Now, good evening, friends. You're very welcome. And to those of you joining us on Zoom and YouTube and everything, you're very welcome. Oh, you can, okay. Can you, let's see now. Can you hear me now? Good. Thank you. It's a wonderful thing about Quakers, they tell you. Well, I am delighted to introduce you to Harvey Gillman. It's quite an honor and a pleasure. Harvey, in his own words, he sees himself as a seeker, an explorer, and a finder, and something of a heretic. These are all traits I value. Trained as a modern linguist in French, Italian, and Spanish, he is fascinated by the challenge of communicating beyond frontiers. As a pilgrim, he has been open to various religious traditions, including Judaism, Buddhism, mystical Christianity, and the Quaker way. There are few people in Ireland who know Harvey as well as Ian Kirk-Smith, who gave this public lecture some years ago. As editor of The Friend weekly magazine, which he produced for 450 editions, he commissioned a book by Harvey, which coincidentally I bought today in our wonderful store, recommended to you. I'm not his agent, but I might become one. So I'm looking forward to reading this. These were, I think, columns from The Friend. So the words convey Harvey's passion for words shared by both author and publisher. Ian Kirk-Smith and his wife Rachel would love to be here, but they have an important commitment tomorrow, the wedding of their daughter in South Belfast meeting. So we wish them all well. Ian wrote, it was always a pleasure and a privilege to be with Harvey, in whatever context or environment, and to listen or read his thoughts and reflections. The tone and tenor always had a sense of inclusion, openness, and tolerance. The prompting always encouraged curiosity and exploration. The region to be explored was so often the life of the spirit, a place that appears to have no borders and boundaries in his world. And there we are. Another book by Epiphanies, which is a wonderful book of poems by Harvey, which I bought today. In a review by Kenneth Bird, he says, for the poet, three things are necessary: a skill with words, a poetic imagination, and something to say. Harvey Gillman possesses or is possessed by all three. He has a love of language and its derivation, and has a happy fluidity of expression honed over the years in the study of French, Italian, Spanish, and English, his native tongue. To travel is better than to arrive, said Robert Louis Stevenson. To seek is better than to find, replies Harvey Gillman. And finally, my own brief observations. When learning first about Quakers 10 years ago, my mentor on the journey, Christopher Moriarty of Monkstown meeting, suggested I read a very slim volume, A Light That Is Shining. It's subtitled An Introduction to Quakers. I'm not a fan of big books, so I loved this one. Some years ago, or some years later, I discovered Harvey the poet. I cannot recollect exactly how or when, but it may well have been through Dan Flynn, who has traveled to be with us again this year with his wife, Kate. They have traveled from Brussels and en route picked up Harvey. So thank you for that. Anyway, Harvey and I became not just Quaker friends, but Facebook friends. I discovered I share many of the same interests and passions as Harvey, including languages, poetry, pilgrimage, and España. Like Harvey, I've walked parts of the Camino de Santiago, and like Harvey, I find solace in writing bad poetry in my case. So I'm looking forward hugely to what Harvey has to tell us about hospitality and the pilgrim, about communion and community. As friends will be aware, when this lecture is finished, it is not Quaker tradition to clap, but to sit in silence. In due course, Harvey will signal when the meeting is finished. There will not be questions after, but after the public lecture, he will be there to meet and greet. So I will leave it to Harvey to decide when to commence the lecture.
I've heard about standing in the light, but I never thought it would be so physically true as well as spiritually true. Good evening, friends. I have to say, I am totally amazed to be here. I really am. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and thought, what am I doing here? Who am I? I've spent years traveling and speaking and using too many words. I said to my partner recently, I've said it all. And I was asked, well, why'd you go on? And when I asked the question, the 4 o'clock in the morning question, why? Where am I going? I only get answers like stay and go. A bit like the Delphic Oracle. You go there and the answer is so ambiguous that whatever you do is either right or wrong. And that's how I feel. I am intrigued by Irish friends. Before I came here, I felt I needed some inculturation, might be the word. And so I read Maurice Wigham's History of Irish Friends. And having read that, and was so impressed at this parallel universe to Britain Yearly Meeting. It was a bit like Harry Potter. It was the world I knew, and it was a world which was different at the same time. And I kept thinking, wow, really? By the way, wow is the basic word of my spirituality. Why am I involved in it? Basically, it's because I stand in amazement at the universe, and my reaction is, wow. You can build a theology upon that if you want. I don't think it's necessary. And then I read the follow-up paper on the deliberations around the new book of discipline and Quaker life and practice. And I thought, oh, how human they are. When I first started going to meeting 40 years ago now, heavens above, I fell in love at every time I went to a yearly meeting, not with one individual of them, that sometimes happened, but with the whole yearly meeting. Wow, I thought, what wonderful people. They're amazing, amazing. Within a few years, I realized they were human beings. That made me feel I had a place with them. I didn't have to try to be what I couldn't possibly be, my own caricature and stereotype of what a perfect friend would be like. I come here tonight, friends, as a restless pilgrim. I come here tonight, friends, as someone who spent his life traveling, having glimpses of eternity, waking up the next morning and wondering, was that so? And desiring the constancy of a community. I move and I want stasis. I'm a nomad finding oases, and each oasis, I think, is this providing me the water for the rest of my life. But a nomad moves on. Oasis is only temporary. I have been to this island twice before. I first worked for Friends with Quaker Peace and Service, and they decided I needed educating. People often do. And they sent me to Belfast to look at Quaker projects. And I remember observing the work undertaken at Quaker House and was amazed. And I had to give a talk. I had to give a talk to a public talk in Belfast. And I realized how many cultural gaffes an Englishman can make when traveling abroad. I remember saying, what Quakers and Roman Catholics have in common is a profound devotionalism. And someone in the audience said, but what about the Protestants then? And I found something to say. I unfortunately often do. But I realize that Britain Yearly Meeting is often seen as the sort of almost colonial mother, kind but colonial mother, or big brother. And I think that is dangerous. Please forgive me, friends, then this evening, if I say something which makes you wince or grind your teeth. Yes, as Porrick said, I see myself as a seeker, as a finder, as an explorer. I'm not keen when friends always call ourselves seekers, by the way. We don't just seek, we do find. We're scared of saying we find because it sounds terribly normative and it sounds as though we possess the truth. That's not what finding is. Finding is standing in the moment, being at home with the truth that one has found. Respecting the fact that other people are at home with their truths. Hospitality is sharing homes. I also call myself a discoverer, a dissident, an exile, a refugee, and a would-be poet. And also a heretic. Do you know that in Greek, hairesis simply means choice? It means someone who makes a choice for him or herself. It means following the dictates of your conscience and your convictions. I am delighted, therefore, to come out as a heretic. During the lockdown, like many people, I was posed with existential questions about where do I go? And what I decided to do was to go through all the poems that I'd ever written that I still had. Because one of my dreams has always to publish an anthology of poetry. I find poetry has a truth. It has a truth because it opens doors and doesn't lock cages. I threw out a lot of them because I thought, Gosh, I do write rubbish now and again. But I took the better ones, edited a few of them, and published it. And I called it Epiphanies, because an epiphany is the revelation of the divine. It's a gift of revelation, of self-disclosure. And in it, I think it was for it, I can't quite remember, I put a poem which I call Questions. For 30 years, for 18 years, I was Outreach Secretary of British Quakers. And although it sounds terribly paradoxical, I was the sort of paid theologian at friend's house. If anyone wanted to know about Quakers, they would come to, pass it on to Harvey. We're doing more important things, we're saving the world. But Harvey was there. So Harvey, I wrote the book, Light and Shining, etc., etc. In order to respond to people's questions, respond, not answer. I make a very strong distinction between to respond and to answer. Respond is the act of respect and politeness to another human being. To answer suggests a power structure. You have the knowledge, they need it. And in this poem, I did an evaluation of my life's work with friends, with tribute to Khalil Gibran, as you'll see when I read it. They asked him, "What do you believe?" He replied, "We are alive together on this fragile earth. What we do has meaning and consequences. We can fail and fall. We can love and nurture." They asked him, "What is the light you talk about?" He replied, "It shines sometimes. It casts a shadow. It reveals, it warms, it burns. It may be found in the heart of each, but is owned by none." They asked him, "What is your faith?" He replied, "The light will shine even when our eyes are closed through sleep or blinded by fear." They asked him, "What is your prayer?" He answered, he replied, sorry. What a slip, eh? "What is your prayer?" He replied, "To keep my arms open and my heart and my eyes, that my lips may sometimes move." They asked him, "What would you die for?" He replied, "My question is rather, for what, for whom do I live this day, this hour?" They asked him, "What is your God?" He replied, "The creative silence that welcomes beyond the edge of words, the light that burns in the darkness, the wind that is in my breath, our breath, blowing where it wills. God is not the name of God. And the wind has no name, but blows through the doors and windows of many temples." They asked him, "What is your authority?" He replied, "The restless communion of the winding path, visited sometimes by grace." They asked him, "What happens when we are dead?" He replied, "Death has taught me a concern for life, for open doors and arching bridges, for the challenges of this moment, for the challenges of this transient life, moments of unknowing, glimmers of more, a discovery." They asked him, "What have you learned in your 70 years?" He replied, "We are not just our names, our past, our spoken and written words. We are all anointed. Our country, our deepest faith, has no flag, no borders. We may be each other's purgatory or hell, or even paradise." They asked him, "What is your hope?" He replied, that we may continue to cherish our questions, cherish each other, that we be not afraid to be silent with each other, that in spite of the pain that we and the day inflict upon each other, we can still believe, have faith, pray, and even dare to love. My hope is that we go on hoping, though our hearts and our history and the shadows of the moon may teach us to give up hope, that despair may not be the last word. So in my dealings with enquirers, I didn't give answers. Quakers do not have creeds. We have lives. Our lives are our answers. And hospitality is a sharing of this experience, of the dilemmas. It is listening so that we may hear. It is of where looking that we may see. It takes place in a world where so many people are not seen, where so many voices are not heard. It is a sharing of an individual story that a larger story we may be heard. And we all have our stories. Our individual stories are part of the larger story. They're part of God's stories. Our lives are still biblical. In my time amongst friends, I've traveled very widely. I've met friends in France, several yearly meetings in the United States, in Italy, actually Italy, in Venice, in a palace belonging to the Waldensians, with a group of students playing chamber music in the what an exquisite experience. I have to tell inquirers, it's not always like that. And teaching Italian Quakers about the discipline of a business meeting is great fun. Believe me, believe me. I thought I was ill-disciplined. I've met friends in Sweden, in Palestine, in South Africa, in Spain, in New Zealand, and in Australia. And each group has their own culture. It's amazing, you know. You think about some of the liberal American meetings. I've been to New York yearly meeting, and I've been to Philadelphia yearly meeting. Both sort of East Coast, liberal, old meetings, quite different in feel, astonishingly so. And it dawned on me that they have their own idiolect. What's that then? Well, I have a sense that religions are languages. Religions are languages which enable us to express something about ourselves or to lie to ourselves of other people. If a language is of love, it's different from a language of hate. But you can be loving and hating in Irish, in English, in Spanish, in Gujarati. It's what you do with the language which counts. And when I came to Friends, I had to learn Quakerese. I really did. I started making mistakes. I was corrected by a wonderful woman, one of my, we don't have saints, but we do. And she was a saint to me. And she always said, no, Harvey, we don't say that. You know, Quakers don't say, I'm a linguist, I learn. You know, I couldn't find a book of Quaker grammar. But you know, you pick it up, don't you? And you know you've made it when you can speak it properly. You see, and many of us are not, of course, I'm not born into a Quaker family by any means. So it's the newcomers have to learn that. And I would warn friends that too much use of Quaker language, and certainly acronyms, is the most inhospitable thing you can do, because you don't respect the fact that some people come from somewhere else. Think about that with immigration. Do you really expect people to understand everything within a short time that they're in the place? And so an idiolect is a unique manifestation of a particular way of speaking. So it's like a dialect, a sub-dialect, a dialect of a dialect. For example, I come from a Jewish working class northern background. Okay, I'm a Mancunian and proud of it. So, well, sometimes when it doesn't rain too much. But my language is formed by my whole life experience. However, alas, it's been overlaid by an Oxford patois. So that when I go home, I'm no longer regarded as one of us quite, because I don't speak like I used to do. I didn't put it on. Life threw it. I love that word last night. I was marinated in it. You know, I like cooking, by the way, so I like them. I was marinated. So I have a particular way of looking at the world, which sometimes makes me feel that am I properly Quaker? You know, he's too emotional to be a Quaker. He talks about anger too much. You know, is passion kosher amongst friends? We're the quiet of the earth. Tell that to George Fox. Anyway, but I was drawn to friends. I was drawn to friends because they offered me the hospitality that I was looking for and the space to breathe in. They offered me, I've written it here, a home and their homes. When I joined Friends in Leon Sea Meeting in Essex about 40 years ago, I inherited grandparents, lots of grandparents. I was only a youngish lad, really, for Quakers. You know, I was in my 30s or something. I love being grandmothered. You know, someone once said she joined Friends because she wanted to be like those elderly, feisty friends she kept meeting at meeting. I want to grow up like that, she said. She's probably about 50 at the time, but I want to grow up when I'm 93. I want to be just like those Quakers, still pacifically battling for the truth. They offered me, did Friends, their words, their silences, their food, and their visions. In the title of this, I use the word communion because I realized that that is what I've been looking for in community. I don't hear friends use the word communion very often. You may do over here, but over there they don't. Now, my partner is an Anglican, and I go with him to communion. I can't say the words. I mean, I was once asked by one of the priests why I don't say anything. I said, well, I'm here, aren't I? You know, just let me be, let me be. But he uses the word communion, and for him, it is the movement. The actual act of communion is the movement from the seat to the altar to take, in the Anglican, it's bread and wine. Okay, it's the movement forward. I've loved that idea. I am moving towards the altar of life. I am moving to the other priests, since we are all priests. I am moving to the place which will allow me to bless as I am blessed. It will allow me the agape, which I find in the famous Quaker monthly meeting teas. I just love the ritual. Well, I don't know, I probably still have it here. There was always a controversy in England about whether we should spend so much time on tea, and is it Quakerly that we should have, how many cakes shall we have? And do we have cream? These big theological issues. Friends don't, on the whole, try to talk about theology because it can be a bit tricky. But you can talk about the furniture. You can talk about what we do with our money. Yeah, you can have a civil war. Don't talk about theology. Anyway, excuse me, I can't help passing on these little observations I've received. Anyway, so Colin, my partner, goes to mass. He uses the word mass. That's his adjunct, because he's a high Anglican. Others do not use the word, and they go to the Eucharist. The Eucharist is thank you, isn't it? Eucharisto, Greek, means I thank you. But we have a Eucharist, do we not, as friends? Do we not offer thanks, gratitude in our lives, in our meetings for worship? So we have communion. If I dare say this amongst Irish friends, we have the Eucharist. We sit at the Lord's table, which is the world. And that is our home. And in the best churches that I know, the priest always says, because they're Anglicans, they can fudge this. They say, anyone who is called to may take communion. Often they also say if you're baptized, but sometimes they simply say, this is the table you are being offered. This is an act of grace. I think friends also have grace to share. Grace is an unmerited gift of the divine in the very act of creation and being. I was once going on in this mode, using the word spirituality, which some people hate, by the way. I realize that. It's very fairy, woolly. By the way, I like woolly things. I was saying before, woolly things move, bend. You can wear them. If a material is too harsh and too many corners, it's very uncomfortable. So I prefer woolliness. I'm an unashamed, progressive, wokish, woolly person. I made no apologies whatsoever for that. Because to be woke is to be awake. And we are called to open our eyes to the reality of the world and the suffering within the world. And at this gathering, I was talking about spirituality, and one man was getting more and more irritated. There's always someone, I may be here, who gets terribly irritated by the way I deliver my talks, especially if you're a structured person and you want to know how A goes to B, goes to C, go to D. And here I am going off on my horse. But I was asked to speak, not a more structured person, so I can only speak in the way I'm given to speak. Anyway, he said, what is spirituality? And I hummed and hawed. Like many good Quakers, we tend to hum and haw because we don't have a pat answer. But I went onto the train and I had a piece of paper. I was going home for the meeting. And I wrote the word spirituality. And I said, I've got half an hour before I reach my destination. I want to give myself a working definition, otherwise I can't use the word again. And I came up with something like this. Spirituality is a circle of relationships between the self and the self. If I am not at home in myself, with myself, if I can't find the spirit within myself, then what have I to offer? It is the self with the group around, the ones that I am with. It is the larger community, and then it is the whole planet subsumed onto the workings of the spirit, which I unashamedly speak with a capital S. spirit with a capital S. I don't just see it as a human spirit. And so to me, spirituality is a widening of consciousness, of relationship at all different levels. And I am who I am because you are who you are. So it's not that I'm developed myself. Someone once said we should sort out our own inner life and then we go out to the world. How can we sort ourselves out if we do not go into the world to find ourselves? We are not, I believe, inheritors of that form of puritanical Protestantism, which demands that we save our own soul. I regard that as profoundly un-Jewish and un-Jesus-like. The church comes from the word kuriakos, that which belongs to the Lord, kurios, Kyrie. The church in Quakers are those turned to the light, and those who are not yet turned to the light, and those perhaps who were turned to the light, and the light seems to have got out, and then we become light bearers to the world. Though we have to be careful because Lucifer means light bearer. So it's a very ambiguous concept. I'd like now to read another poem, which I called The Rye Pilgrimage. I live in Rye, which is the edge between Sussex and Kent. I live near a marsh. I overlook the marshes. It's a medieval town. I spent my life going on pilgrimage, literally going on pilgrimage to various places. And then at the time of lockdown, I decided I would reflect on my life. And here is Rye Pilgrimage 2020. On his return from the Camino de Compostela, he fastened a shell to his back to remind him that each step was pilgrimage. There were stars to follow and signs by the road, many a guide with anecdotes and legends, footsteps carved deep into the earth. Throughout his life, there were journeys undertaken to shrines, ruins, where hermits and madmen had found the consolation or hardship they craved for. There was Jerusalem, and he wept on Mount Zion, and at Yad Vashem, where the candle was reflected in many tiny flames. There was Holy Island, where the sheep bore witness, and at dawn a heron had joined him for worship at the rising of the sun. There was Walsingham. He knelt in the holy house, built according to the instructions of an improbable dream. There were banners high on his march through London. They demanded peace, an end to lamentation. There was the house of Anne Frank, where betrayal brought death, and after her words, only silence was possible. There was the camp in Gaza, where he spoke of his origins, could offer only his lamentations. There was Iona and the Western Saints, a fortress against the tide. He longed again for illumination. The old meeting houses of South Jersey, where the friends had gathered to realize the kingdom. Now the roads are blocked and the sky is limited and footsteps counted. He leaves the house and walks the short distance to where honesty flowers amongst the maples. Beyond the yucca and the rosebush, the armory and the toll house, the path grows sacred. Again, the path leads inward, past the bluebells and the cow parsley. He honors the nettles. Dandelions and butterbur, periwinkles and violets, stations of the cross. The rising and the falling, the rebirth of beech and horse chestnut, forget-me-not. A journey beyond bramble, horsetail, to where lords and ladies hold court. Among the nettles and the celandine, an intimate pilgrimage, none the less holy. No name given, no guide, no sacred text, just signs of grace along the roadside. I have been on my pilgrimage because I guess most of my life I have felt I was in exile. I was given, my parents were indifferent, rather hostile to religion, but I was sent to a very orthodox Hebrew school. I was told what to think, what to read, where to go and where not to go, whom to love and whom not to love. I have borne my exile for most of my life. One of the joys has been to meet my fellow exiles, to meet the fellow immigrants with such a rich history of longing and contemplation and worship. A pilgrim is someone who is a stranger, peregrinos. But pilgrims have so much to tell. They don't take things for granted. They have to invent. I am amazed in my years working with friends how many people have been hurt by the religious tradition in which they were brought up. I've even met friends who have left friends, have needed to leave friends to find out who they were so they can find a new authenticity. I once wrote an article called "The Necessity of Atheism, for God's Sake." We need the time when we have to smash the idols, and that's so, so painful. But then we have an extraordinary sense of freedom, a frightening sense of freedom, because the old roadsides have gone sometimes. And all institutions put them back again. Don't Quakers put them back again. It's just that I can take it from friends because I love them so much, I think. But at times I'm like anyone one loves, one is driven to distraction and irritation. Because I still want to know, why do you do this? Why do you think that? Don't tell me George Fox did it or John Woolman did it. Very often they didn't, by the way. We're very good at creating a mythology of Quaker history. You know, very often I hear friends say something, and I say, no, that was invented in 1924, actually. But we say it with great conviction. If we are to find the authenticity of communion and offer hospitality for ourselves and to other people, then somehow we have to reach a sort of naked form of spirituality, which can be quite frightening, where labels go. I have found the divine at Mass, in Jewish ceremonies, in a Hindu temple, out on the beach, in a bar, in the street, wherever I have been open, wherever I have not been afraid. And I still am quite afraid at times. I remember once when I was a student in Paris, it's the first time I'd ever been away by myself. I lived on chocolates and oranges because that's the only thing I could afford. But we did have grants in those days in Britain. I don't know what happens now in Ireland, but I had quite a nice grant, and I could even go to Paris on my first year's grant at Easter, and I went. And I went to the Bois de Boulogne with my chocolate and my oranges, and I sat on a bench next to a tramp. By the way, I was told, interesting about idiolect, I was told when I told that story in Swarthmore College in the States, and I was told not to use the word tramp because it meant prostitute in American English. And that would have given you quite, well, that's what I was told. If an American says it, it must be true. Anyway, anyway, as I was telling Kate, I used the word vagabond there, but it doesn't matter. I met this human being. I met this disheveled, ragged human being. And I said, practicing my French, you know, Monsieur, vous voulez du chocolat? Aussi un peu d'orange? Oh, that's not... Oh, merci, monsieur, merci. And we had this wonderful conversation, fabulous conversation, feeding the duck. He was feeding the ducks. I was eating. I had communion with a tramp in the Bois de Boulogne feeding the ducks. And he revealed his life and what happened to him in Paris during the war. What more can one want in this life than a sense of openness and the love of a stranger, unconditioned by appearance, by label, by whatever? Do not forget to show hospitality, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. I do believe in angels. They don't wear wings. No way. And they come in the most bizarre forms. And the only response is love. And a community, my desire for community is a desire to be with a group of people who can discipline me, who can call me to account, and who can show me how to love. You may guess I'm somewhat of an extrovert, and I need the discipline of a largely introverted group of people at times. But I really do believe that this circle, the circles of self, other, the world, are not linear. They go round and round and round and round. And it is not unusual that when people feel out of sorts with themselves, that they have a desire to go off into a natural setting, to be healed by the earth. How can it be unusual when we are part of the earth? We are who we are because we are children of the earth. You may guess I've not actually said quite a lot of what I'd written out. I'm glad about that because I get very bored reading long texts, but it's online. So if you want to know what I meant to say, you can read it. You can read it. It's not a sacred text, but I just want to. I realize the time, and I don't to abuse your hospitality. I hope something has come over about how I see this, but I just want to end with the last one and a bit pages. My partner was years ago a monk. He didn't jump over the wall for me, believe me. He was a monk, and he'd long gone away from being a monk. And he'd never, I mean, he found it quite intriguing to have a relationship with someone from a Jewish background. Actually, I came out as a Quaker first, and it was interesting because he thought Quakers were, I've got to be careful what I say here, but he thought that Quakers were an evangelical church, a literalist, fundamentalist evangelical church. He really, so I had to teach him quite a lot. And then he had to teach me quite a lot about Anglicanism, because when I was a child, to go to a Christian place of worship was a sin, by the way. For Orthodox Jews, to go to a Christian place of worship is a sin. And when I first went to Friends, when I was 17 or 18, I had to go in the evening and I had to try not to be seen by anybody who knew me, because I was doing something transgressive. Isn't that interesting? To go to meeting is an act of transgression. Talk about early Quakers, you see. And for me, it was. But having got through that, Colin said to me one day, why don't we have a Passover meal? I hadn't done Passover for years, but he was intrigued. And of course, quite interestingly, because, you know, the Last Supper and all that. So we started doing Passover meals. And it was interesting because we invited we knew lots of priests. I'd spent my life around priests, I don't know why. Priests and monks and nuns, and it was an extremely eclectic group of people. Even Quakers were invited, and we told the story, and the Passover story is a story of liberation, isn't it? Exodus, odos means the way out. Hodos is the way, a path in Greek, and the way out. So Exodus just means the exit. Okay, so we at the Passover table, you always have a seat for Elijah. So it's always empty. And you always have, sorry, in this gathering, but you always have a glass of wine for Elijah, because he's a Jewish prophet, he likes his wine. And we used, as children, I remember, we used to see whether the glass would go, the wine would go down as Elijah came in, you know. But he must have been a bit odd because he'd gone to everybody else's house and had a bit of wine. Anyway, so I've always thought that at every table we are at, there should be, even metaphorically, a chair for the stranger. The immigrant, the exile, the refugee, always a place. However, there is a story told about the narrative of the Exodus narrative, because you may remember that in the Exodus narrative, the Israelites go through the water, but the Egyptians, they have to get drowned. Not only that, their horses get drowned. And I always thought, what about the horses then? It's not, you know, come on, God. What about the horses? It's just as I feel when I read the book of Job. You know, Job is saved at the end. What happens to his first wife and kids? They're all destroyed so that God can prove to Job, that Job can prove to God that he's okay. Okay, Job gets another wife, gets new kids. Okay, what about the first Mrs. Job? If I wanted to write a book called What About the First Mrs. Job? It's not fair. Anyway, the story is, and this is part of the good part of the Jewish tradition, the rabbis tell the story that when the Israelites go through the water and the Egyptians and the horses are drowned, the angels say to God, let's rejoice. The Israelites are saved. And God says, how can I rejoice when my children, the Egyptians, and the horses are drowning? Now, okay, that's only a partial thing. They still get drowned in the story. But it's a first glimmer of the universalism which can be found in the highest realms of religious consciousness. But I am aware this happened in France in the end of the 19th century. There was a row amongst British Quakers. I think it was British Quakers. I know there was a row in the end of the 18th century amongst Irish friends about the role of scripture. But someone was saying about wanting to join in with other groups on the Our Father. Huh? And these people say, but they're the world's people. We cannot say the Our Father with the world's people, because the world's people are not the children of God. And that's found within Quakerism. So when we're looking at the shadow side of Quakerism, I think it's important to realize that we also have had to be educated as a people. But I love that. The redemptive understanding that God is the model, whatever God is, spirit is the model of hospitality. I've often been to monasteries. The guest at the door is Christ knocking at the door. Now, you would think that anyone going to a monastery is going to find Christ within the monastery. I like the idea of Christ knocking at the door to find Christ in the monastery. How interesting. You know, in the color purple, one of the characters, Shug, says to, I've forgotten the name of the other character, she says, white folk go to church to find God. I believe we go to church to share God, because God's where we are. We don't need to go there, but it's made holier even if we share the thing we have within ourselves. The temple is made holy by the worshipper. Without the worshipper, the temple is a desolate place. It's made alive by human intimacy and contact. And I want to end now, because I've talked about the human things quite a lot. And as I said, I missed out 2/3 of what I was going to say. But I was very aware of the role of the natural world. We all were, weren't we, during the lockdown, when we only had our own, you know, those of us, I have to say, who are privileged enough to have access to greenery, because I realized there were many people in all over the world who had no access to greenery, who were living in cramped conditions with many people together. I have to say I was very privileged. I live in Rye, beautiful marshes nearby. But this is my reflection on the world and hospitality. It's called Still. This earth is the same earth, is it not, which we traversed with determination, where in former times we ventured forth when travel was permitted, the choice was ours over time and destination. This earth now proclaims a different dominion. It cries out now from the fissures we have torn in it, from the scars that we have clawed in it, from the brutality of our embrace, our craving for conquest. Yet we, vanquished by victory, remain apart, until in the bowels of the earth we bury our dead and scatter our ashes in its still fertile loam. Still, even now, it is ready to receive us. We are its children, are we not? Made of its flesh, dust of its dust. Our hearts beat to its rhythms. We spin as the earth spins. Though we have tasted the fruit of the tree of knowledge and Eden become exile, we remain the offspring of its seasons. Still, the earth offers us ground for our planting. Generous still, if we would grow wise and tender. Earth for our planting, trees for our healing, a new, a fragile, an abundant harvest. Still. And this is the actual paragraph I wrote to end the talk with. A question which haunts me often is, how do we fragile human beings live together on and with this fragile earth? We are of the earth, on the earth. The earth has hosted us. We have however, offered in return not hospitality, but hostility. Spiritual hospitality is precisely an awareness of the interconnectedness of all things, but it also offers a place of discovery, of learning, of nurture, of reciprocity, of repentance, and of lamentation. In former years, many Quaker meeting houses has windows towards the top of the walls. You are not to be disturbed by the natural world outside. Today, the windows are lower. We are encouraged to see the world as an extension of the meeting house, or even the meeting house as an extension of the world. Perhaps our worship is greener nowadays. Quakers have never adopted the Puritan stance of purifying one's own soul. We are a community whose spirituality is expressed in relationship with society and more with the earth itself. We are the offspring of her seasons. She is our host. Her life and ours depend on each other. We are her children. We are her pilgrims. She offers us a way of pilgrimage into ourselves, into our communities. Even in exile, she calls us into friendship. We bear still the marks of Eden. We are invited into the garden.